Whether you call it kveik, kvik, or kvike, there's no denying that this unique Norwegian yeast has had a remarkable impact on the brewing scene, and Imperial Yeast's A43 Loki is one of the best versions out there. With the ability to produce a clean beer when fermented as warm as 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, you heard that right, while also performing well at more standard ale temperatures, Imperial Yeast A43 Loki is as versatile as it gets, meaning you have zero excuses for failing to brew throughout the year. Learn more about A43 Loki at imperialyeast.com and grab a pouch for your next batch to see what all the fuss is about. Belgium is known for many good things: chocolate, waffles, fries, and perhaps most importantly, beer. Some of the most popular styles being those that have been produced by Trappist monks for centuries. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this short and shoddy episode to discuss the Belgian style of beer known as Trappist Single is contributor Andy Carter.
Yeah, Marshall, it's been a while. It's been about 5 or 6 years, but I was fortunate enough to take a trip to Belgium, and I made it a point to go to the West Veterland Trappist Monks Brewery and tasting room, and I got to try, of course, the 12, the big quadruple, but I was really looking forward to trying their blonde, and I got to tell you, I was blown away. This totally changed how I thought about Belgian single beers, and I'm really excited to talk about how to do this in a short and shoddy method today.
I've said it a gazillion times already that I've never, I like Belgian styles of beer, but I'm not, they're not something that I ever became obsessed with like I have, English ale and IPA and lagers, but I also have, I believe it's Westy 6, right?
Mm-hmm. Or blonde, or it's called blonde.
Or too, blonde, yeah, exactly. I had some friends who went on a Belgian beer tour and brought some back and shared it with us. And my goodness, I mean, even though it traveled over the seas, it was still fresher than what I couldn't find it here ever, anyways. And I agree with you.
Yep,
I liked it better than Westy 12, the quad. But that's also just my preference. Anyways, I've found this style to be quite a bit more refreshing than other style. If you've ever had like they call it Leffa or Laffa or something, which tastes to me like a banana split almost. So there's kind of this range in Belgian blonde or Trappist single style beers. And while my experience with traditional examples are limited, the BJCP's comment that it's a Belgian interpretation of a German Pils, which I think is kind of weird, was enough to motivate me to try brewing one up for myself using short and shoddy methods, the results of which we're going to be talking about later in this episode. All right, if you like what we're up to and want us to keep doing it, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy. By committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, you're going to receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Our guest for this month for the Q&A session, October of 2021, is the dynamic brewing duo of Brad Gaines and Spencer Andrews from Crow and Wolf Brewing Company right here in Clovis, California. Brad and Spencer have been good friends of mine for a while. They're going to be joining me here in the studio to answer patron questions live on October 23rd, 2021. So make sure to make your pledge of just $3 or more per month by Friday the 22nd, which will also give you access to all past sessions with guests like John Palmer, Michael Tonsmeyer, Dr. Tom Shellhammer, John Kimmich from The Alchemist, and many, many more. To check out all of the other rewards you can get for helping us do what we do, head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who have an array of amazing purpose-built stainless brewing products to improve your brew day. If you're looking for a high-quality pilot brewery, make sure to check out the gorgeous BH15 single-tier system, which comes with a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Head over to brewershardware.com to see what they're all about, and make sure to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Dustin Hogg from Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, had some feedback on episode 202 where we discussed dessert beers. Dustin says, I built up a yeast starter from the sludge left over in a 4-pack of hazy IPA cans made by a local brewery I like. I used the yeast to make a few batches of any IPA with El Dorado, Mosaic, and Zythos hops. The first two included a lactose addition and were amazing. The third time I brewed it, I forgot to add the lactose. The batch was still good and drinkable, but it really lacked the wow of the first two batches. I wasn't able to taste them side by side, so I could easily have been biased by my memory. I wanted to at least anecdotally support the conclusion that adding lactose to pale hoppy beers can elevate rather than distract from what is already there.
I mean, this makes perfect sense, and I think that's why, though it's very derided from the commercial side to add lactose to these beers. These beers are, especially hops, modern hops today, they are so fruity that kind of like how you do a recipe, so you're cooking and you need a little acid, you need a little sugar. A lot of tomato sauce recipes ask for a little bit of sugar to brighten up the tomatoes. This is what you're doing, right? You're going to add that sweetness to really improve, not distract from the fruitiness flavor, and then it just ties it all together more. Now, I will say, or at least in my estimation or my experience, that sweetness makes it a lot less drinkable, though those 4 ounces you have of it are very delicious.
That's a good point. I kind of mentioned that in episode 202, where Cade and I talked about these dessert beers. I actually rather enjoy tasting these interesting, adjunct laden beers. Drinking an entire pint is kind of difficult for me, but they are fun. They're very experimental. Now, my experience with lactose, I'm not sure if I went into detail about my tasting lactose on its own. It's not terribly sweet. Oddly enough,
no.
If you take a bit of table sugar and you put it on your tongue, it tastes sweet like sugar. Lactose does not do that for me, at least, and so it is interesting. I know that we've experimented with this, Andy. In fact, we published the lactose experiment the very morning that this episode dropped. So there is some I guess it looks like maybe we did that on purpose, but it just so happened to fit that way. And so you'll have to go read that experiment to see for yourself whether lactose additions actually have a perceptible impact, at least in that experiment. But in my estimation, it doesn't have much of a sweetness on its own. I wouldn't think that it would contribute too much sweetness to a beer. Does it impact, mouthfeel and body? I know a lot of people believe that. So great feedback, Dustin. I appreciate you writing in. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. When we return from this break, the focus will be on Trappist Single. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles as well as one of the lowest priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. When I think of Belgian ale, the first thing that comes to my mind is the fruity and spicy character created during fermentation based on the yeast strains that's typically used for these styles. Because of this, it's easy for me to sort of clump all Belgian styles together, or at least that used to be the case until I started exploring all of the various styles that originate from this amazingly awesome brewing region, including the various Trappist ales, one of which is the humble single, also known, I believe, as Enkel.
Yeah. So what's interesting, or at least for me, what I've always thought of as Belgian ales, like you said, are these bigger, higher, fruitier things. And you pick and choose around the BJCP style guidelines, and you see that there's clearly this aspect of Belgian brewing that is not shunning that, but has developed a different way. You see this in Belgian pale ale and other styles where the phenolic character is much lower. The fruity character is much lower. It's still there, of course, but it's focused more on the hops and the malt. And only recently, in the last time the BJCP updated their guidelines, they finally added what they call Trappist Single. It's been brought up in the other style guidelines, the Enkel, like you mentioned, or some Potter's beer, some lower alcohol beer that the monks are making. So, still strictly a Trappist production, not the other, or Abbey, which is the commercial side of Belgian ale production. They're mimicking or imitating the Trappists. So it was really cool to have the ability to have a category that's described, and we can now have a reference point to talk about Trappist Single.
Yeah, and for people who may not be terribly familiar with Trappist brewing tradition. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, Andy, but there is, again, a tradition of I don't understand quite why or the origins of this, but when you hear single, that means it's going to have a bit lower alcohol. Some people would call a Trappist Single a table beer or a Potter's beer. Yeah. Lower alcohol, and it's going to be of the paler yellowish color. Once you go to a double, and double would suggest that it has more alcohol, and a double is always going to be darker in color. You get to triple. Triple is going to be paler in color and have even more booze in it. You get to quad, again, darker in color and even more booze in it. So it's a weird naming convention that I still don't totally understand. But just so you know that a single is the first in that lineup of Trappist designations that is paler in color, lower in alcohol, should be very, very easy to drink and rather refreshing.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of missing, right? Because you could say double, triple, quadruple, but before 2015 in the style guidelines, like, well, there's this missing gap, right? There's one. Where's the one? Where's the first one? And I think this comes from the fact that these are just much harder to travel, much harder to find on the shelf fresh. I think I found maybe one producer in the United States, and the bottle was 5 years old or something like that. So that's never going to be anywhere near what it should be, right?
Yeah.
So I was excited to see, not only I've brewed this many times, but to see you do this as a short and shoddy, because it's such a simple grist and recipe that you can get this done, and then you have this super refreshing, super quaffable beer with minimal effort.
Exactly, and this is one of those styles. I know people get really caught up in traditional brewing approaches and such, and I think there's understandably so. In terms of German brewing tradition, there are a lot of techniques that some are going to adopt as being necessary in order to produce the best versions of these beers. In my research of this Belgian Trappist brewing tradition, yeah, there are certain things that the old school Trappist breweries did, in part because they probably had to, because of a quality of ingredients at the time that they were brewing these beers originally. But there's not, I don't seem to find too much dogma surrounding the brewing approach. And so, like you said, I was really excited just to see if I could flip one of these Trappist singles around, how quickly I could do it, and how quickly I could have a more characterful yeast, speaking of fermentation character, clean, easy drinking table beer on tap. So let's spend a minute talking just about the style in general. I already mentioned that a Trappist Single is going to be more pale yellow. The BJCP says it can get up to a medium gold color. You typically want it to be, this is the case for so many styles. You want it to be as clear as possible, have a really nice, a pillowy white cap of foam on the top. Mm-hmm. What you might expect from a lot of European pale style beers, whether lager or ale.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned earlier the style guidelines calls out making a Pilsner or like an analog being a Gillen Pilsner. I think this is actually accurate. And I suspect a lot of the reason this beer came out. So, when I reference it, for me, I'm referencing the one moment I had the West-Veterland blonde at the brewery. So I'm always going to come back to that sense memory, of course. But there was a time, post World War II, there was more gravity tea towards lighter styles of beer, Pilsner. There was a ability to have glass. You could see these beers; they were clear, and so even Duvel, a Belgian golden ale, comes out of this mantra of lighter, cleaner, crisper. It took West Federland a while. It says in the history of this beer is only from 1999 to come up with this lighter, actually higher alcohol than previous Potter's beers they had made, but just to make something that looks better, looks cleaner. It has a big hop presence that was more in vogue, and so this is cool. So like we said, it is good to say Pilsner because it has a lot of the same appearances. Golden in color, nice pillowy white head. Of course, that's where kind of the differences go away because the aroma, well, it's going to be very hoppy, and that was what really blew me away. I don't know about your bottle, Marshall, but when they cracked the one open at the table, I had this. It was almost like I was drinking an American pale ale. The level of hop almost came off dry hopped, in my opinion. The aroma was so big.
Yeah, the hop aroma, right? That was the same. That was my experience too. It's surprising because I at least don't really expect that in these Trappist beers in general. So, but I feel like there's something to be said about that because if you're picking up hop aroma, now it could be argued that maybe what you were getting was ester aroma that you associate with hops because here in America, fruity comes from hops, not yeast. So I thought about that as well. It had this hop aroma, what I would believe to be a hop aroma, kind of a fruity hop aroma that was very, very pleasant. And to me, suggested that, the yeast doesn't have to be crazy in your face bubblegummy. Exactly. In fact, the BJCP says bubblegum character in Trappist Single is actually inappropriate. And I agree with that on many levels. Little side note, I did some Googling a couple years ago on what the hell bubblegum flavor actually is. Apparently it was invented as a blend, some weird blend, I think 30-70 of like strawberry and banana. A blend of strawberry and banana, and that created the classic bubblegum flavor that we all know today. So I thought that was interesting. So if you experience a bubblegum note in a Belgian beer, that what you're detecting likely is a blend of like strawberry and banana. And again, in Trappist Single, that's not necessarily appropriate. So it's something you want to watch out for. I know that Belgian yeasts, people have all kinds of beliefs about if you ferment it cooler, you're going to push phenolics, and if you ferment it warmer, you're going to push out more esters. I just stick with typically when I'm making these styles, I go with my normal ale fermentation temperature of 66F or 19C. And to me, that's just the right balance. Again, I'm not aiming with any Belgian beers to get that huge Belgian yeast character that many of us are aware of over here in the States.
Yeah, and I think that is, the restraint there is important because otherwise you're not going to get the other parts of the beer, right? If the beer just comes off as one note, big fruit, you don't get the nuances of the hops, you don't get the nuances of the malt. And so I think that's critical. Fermentation temperature, middle of the road, just stick there, and hey, the next time you do it, go cooler, see what you think of that, and then build that sense memory for yourself.
Yeah.
So like we said, flavor, there's going to be that, to me, that perceived hop aroma. It really carried into the flavor, but then paired with that Belgian, that classic phenol fruit flavors as well. The mouthfeel for these is very, it's nothing crazy. This is a light beer, right? So it should be fairly dry. Fairly snappy. It's not going to restrict your palate, and it comes refreshing, right? It has enough bitterness, not too much. I think that's one thing where the bitterness on this is a little bit less than a German Pilsner because of this is going to get into the water chemistry as well. It's never going to be as perceptibly as sharp on the palate,
right?
And then other than that, this is a very light, easy drinking beer. It should be refreshing. It was the first of multiple beers we had that day, so it should just kind of awaken your palate a bit. And yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
So that I think there's similarities other than the yeast strain, they fall in line a lot. So
yeah, I'm with you. When I think of a good Trappist Single after having a handful of what I consider good examples, I'm thinking clean. I get the comparison to German Pils, just of Belgian origin. So it's going to have those, some hints of what you expect in a Belgian ale. But it's clean, it's crisp. You look at the vital statistics for Trappist Single, you're looking at, OG of 1044 to 1054 with an FG of 1004 to 1010, and an ABV of 4.8 to 6%. I mean, that's like a money beer in my opinion. I like if I'm trying to make something that's more sessionable or a table style beer, I'm going to go towards the lower end of the OG. Though typically, if I'm making a beer like this, I'm probably going to aim for that 1050 to 1052 because there's something to me about the malt character I get when I'm using enough malt to hit that point that I just enjoy. So it's a subjective thing for me.
Yeah.
IBU 25 to 45. Again, that's similar to the range for a German Pils. So you start to see the comparison here, and then the SRM is real low, 3 to 5. So you want that really pale color, maybe golden if you're using some crystal malt or something like that. So just a nice, clean, easy drinking beer. In terms of ingredients, this isn't a crazy beer to brew because the ingredients are pretty simple. I think a lot of people probably just stick straight up with Pilsner malt for a beer like this.
Yeah, and then I highly recommend that, and I think that's the right path because again, you're trying to remove the other ingredients and let the hops and the yeast shine. And just high quality, Belgian pale malt or Belgian Pilsner malt even, or any really to short and shoddy it. Any Pilsner malt will do fine. Even a lighter base malt will not distract from anything.
Yeah,
you can build in adjuncts. You could theoretically do that too. I would not go to the first place, but again, to make it light, like any type of lighter ale, you can lighten up. You can lighten the body up if you think to you as you perceive maybe I think it could dry out a little bit more. You can go flake maize, corn, or the rice, rice extract, or even sugar. Right? Belgian ales have a long history of using type of candy sugar or beet sugar, so you can just dry it out a bit if you feel like you need that.
Yeah, given the lower starting gravity of this style, I don't see many recipes that are using any adjuncts to increase the ABV or increase the OG. But it can be done if that's something you want to do. If you want to keep it as drinkable as possible and even reduce the malt flavor, throw in some sugar or something like that. In terms of hops, you're looking at Satzer style hops. So noble hops work perfectly in this style. You got to use enough to get that IBU up there. So if you're like me, you're going to go for something like Magnum, which isn't a noble hop necessarily, but it is a classic European hop that has that more spicy character to it. And it's high enough in alpha acid that you don't have to use too much of it. So it's not going to add that vegetal note that you get sometimes when you're using 3% AA, Tettninger or something at 60 minutes, and you got to use 2 ounces just to get you up to that 25 IBU mark.
Yeah, I think it is also funny, on the way to the brewery, on the way to the cafe, you actually bike through hop fields, so you're already loaded up to experience some good hop flavor and aroma. I do think, other than the yeast strain here, I do think the hops are critical, and using a large late edition of them, like you said, you were talking about some Sazerac type styles, like Saz would be great. Even some newer ones, you can look at like a Saphir or something where there's maybe a new kind of edge to it, which would be kind of cool. But I think a good late edition of it is going to be critical to get that hop impact, hop aroma and flavor. But again, you want that clean bitterness. You will also, when you get into water chemistry, how you would refine that, but that clean bitterness with that high hop flavor is critical.
Yep. And then obviously you got to use a Belgian yeast strain. I would shy away from those that are heavily isoamyl acetate producers, banana flavor. That again, the bubblegum thing, the banana thing, that is not necessarily appropriate in this style. So the one that I've used a few times that I really enjoy, not just for Trappist Single, but as a Trappist a Trappist yeast in general, is no longer produced by Imperial Yeast. It was monastic, but they still do have the triple double, which is fantastic. If you want something that is quick acting and produces, minimal to moderate fermentation character that's noticeable but not in your face, Gnome is another really good one from Imperial Yeast. Yeah. I think all of the yeast labs out there have some variety of like Trappist yeast available, and any of those are going to work well for this style.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, like, as you look at them, they can be a little, if you've not looked at this yourself in Belgian ales, maybe you're just getting to them now, you're home brewing, you're looking at them, it can be a little daunting because you see all these data points and you're like, well, which one do I pick? I think any of them will do great. If you're worried, I would say for this style, ferment a little cooler because you don't want those high, big flavors, big esters and stuff. Like you said, you want the banana. It was very interesting to say banana with strawberry comes bubblegum. I mean, you don't want that, right? But any of them, and like I said, I think my personal favorite would be the triple double, but Gnome work would just sub in exactly right here.
Yeah. So now in terms of the brewing process, I mentioned earlier, this is not one that I feel like too many people are too caught up on in the way you approach brewing it. The idea is just to produce a clean, drinkable, beer. Water chemistry to me on this is something you want to focus on. Like you said, Andy, you want this to be crisp, zippy, nice, easy drinking, washes off the palate quickly. For me, the way that I get that is by increasing the sulfate to chloride ratio. So I want higher sulfate than I do chloride. And in a style like this, based on the water that I typically start with, that might just mean adding a gypsum addition. I'm not one to adjust my pH these days anymore, but given the fact that you're not using any roasted grains, you shouldn't be, at least if you're making a proper Trappist single.
Yeah.
If you're not using any roasted grains, your mash pH might have a tendency to kind of get a bit higher. And so you might want to, if you're concerned about mash pH, you might want to add some acid to adjust that pH down a bit.
Yep. I think that's spot on. I think you want that that zippiness though. This comparison. I like going back to this. German Pilsner. I do find a lot of the beers in Belgium that we had on draft, they were not nearly as minerally or sulfite. There's this kind of mineraliness that comes from the water I find in Germany versus not in Belgium.
Yeah.
So you don't want to go too crazy, right? I think some people, or at least in my experience, when you're trying to recreate some of these German styles, you actually kind of go a little high on the mineral content to try to get that minerality. You don't want to do that here. You want to let just give it enough so your palate senses the hops that much sharper.
Yeah. Yep. Couldn't agree more. In terms of mash, you're looking at your typical 60 or 90 minute mash rest just to get full conversion. This is a very simple grist, and so you don't need to wait too long for that conversion to occur. Because of the fact that you are using Pilsner malt for the most part, this style is made with a Belgian Pilsner malt, traditionally at least. You might hear recommendations to boil for a minimum of 90 minutes in order to drive off DMS or the risk of DMS in the future. And so that's pretty common. 60 minutes, you'll probably be fine. I see a lot of recipes out there for this style that call for a 60-minute boil. And then you want to chill it quickly. Again, this is a style that you want to be relatively clear. And so by chilling quickly, you're going to create that cold break that can drop out, rack that wort over to a fermentation vessel, and then you pitch your yeast and ferment it out. Again, for fermentation, I'm sticking to 66F or 19C because I want restrained Belgian yeast character. I'm not going to do anything outside of that normal range. I'm not quite sure about this claim that cooler fermentation temperatures tend to kind of favor that the production of phenolic compounds. I understand a lot of people genuinely believe that warmer fermentation temperatures will push out those esters. I just go right smack in the middle there, 66F, 19C, and it seems to do the job for me.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about that is there's a aspect of aeration and pitching rate that is also going to affect the character of the yeast. So, again, we're just going to stick true with a packet of yeast in the fermenter, and that's it. But if you're interested in going a little further with this, you might want to under pitch or under aerate to generate different flavors. So just a thought, just a sidebar.
Well, that gets a lot of talk as well, right? Is that if you under pitch, that it's the yeast stress that ultimately results in these yeast producing these flavorful aromatic compounds. I don't want that to be too strong, so I tend to avoid doing anything that might produce it. So again, like with so many styles, traditionally speaking, the proper approach that you might take is to build up a yeast starter and make sure that you're pitching an adequate rate of yeast cells. Once the fermentation is complete, you can I think a lot of these Belgian strains, in my experience, aren't too fluffy. They'll drop out if you cold crash long enough and leave it to condition for a while. But you might get a little bit of help with that or assistance with it by using some gelatin fining or biofine clear or something like that. When I had, and this may be different for you, I'm actually curious of your thoughts on this, Andy. When I had the Westvleteren blonde ale that I did, it was not crystal clear. There was a kind of a haze to it. You could still see through the glass. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't bright, like a Miller Lite is bright. But you want to get it as clear as possible. You want that stuff to get out of the way so that you're tasting the beer.
Exactly. And you have to remember that beer is, inevitably, I would have to say I'm almost 100% of this. That was a bottle conditioned beer too. So that little bit of yeast, a little bit of haze. Even though when we had, it was definitely hazy, but very clear otherwise. Right. So I would just, use your standard packaging techniques. Time is your friend here to clarify the beer. And then carbonation serving, like I said, being bottle conditioned, it had pretty solid carbonation. I think you want to be above 2.5. I think you want to be in the 3 volume range actually for this beer to keep it zippy, keep it crisp. And that just kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of Belgian styles. You're going to be on the higher end of your carbonation. So, dial in that dextrose addition or whatever sugar you're going to add. So you're hitting those numbers and hitting them hard to get the right amount of carbonation. And then serving, get a nice Trappist goblet, crack that bottle open and let a good fluffy head form during serving this beer. I think that's critical.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. One of the things I expect in pretty much all Trappist style beers is that nice creamy foam that doesn't go away. It's sticky. It sticks to the side of the glass, creates lace. Belgian lace. Exactly. There's a reason for the name. So that's all important when it comes to the carbonation and serving. I'm with you. 2.6 to 3.0 volumes of CO2. To me, this is like a soda version of beer. You want it to be refreshing. And that's exactly what it is. Well, what happened when I made a Trappist single using short and shoddy methods? Results from that when we're back from this break. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAV experience, you have got to go with the brew bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the brew bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a brew bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
As I mentioned before, I've never been a huge fan of Belgian ale, which isn't to say I don't like the stuff. I just don't necessarily seek it out very often or even brew it. Having had a few examples, though, of Trappist Single that I thought were excellent, I decided to brew it up for myself using, well, less than conventional methods. We talked a little bit about the more traditional take on brewing a Trappist Single earlier, and now we're going to talk about my crazy take on doing it short and shoddy style. For this one, I brewed a full volume brew in a bag batch on my 240 volts SS Brewtech 1V electric system. This is a brew in a bag system. Pretty classic. It's just electric, so it heats things a little bit faster than I was getting with propane. I started this brew day at 12:58 p.m. on the nose by collecting the full volume of water, which I run through a filter. I don't want chlorinated or chloraminated water. Thankfully, my local water source does not use chloramine, but they do use small amounts of chlorine, and so I ran it through an RV filter to try to get rid of as much of that stuff as possible. And then I just added a sprinkle of gypsum. Like I said earlier, I want this beer to be crisp and refreshing. And calcium chloride, when the chloride levels start to get even with those sulfate levels or even more, you perceive, it's well accepted that you kind of perceive a roundness, a warmth is how I describe it, kind of a bready warmth from the malt. I don't want that in this. I want it to be crisp, refreshing, wash off my palate really quick. So I sprinkled in an unmeasured amount of gypsum. I didn't go overboard with it or anything, just kind of guesstimating based on my history of brewing with this water. Now, having never brewed a Trappist Single before this, I hit the internet for inspiration and ended up designing a very, very simple recipe by using just 100% Mecca grade Pelton Pilsner style malt. I've used this malt a ton over the last couple of years, and I've talked about in the past how craft malt seems to be a bit richer, at least in my experience, than other malts, and that's definitely the case with Pelton. So this is not a classic Belgian style Pilsner malt. This is an American-made, Oregon-made, craft Pilsner malt, and I was really curious to see how it would play in this Trappist single. So when the water was to strike temperature, I dropped the bag of grains into it and I stirred to incorporate before checking to ensure that I hit my target mash temperature of 154 degrees Fahrenheit or 68 degrees C. Now, the reason that I went with 154 is, first off, because I've read that that's kind of the sweet spot for both alpha and beta amylase. So you're getting both active in that range. But also, I'm using just Pilsner malt. I want this beer to dry out. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, but I don't want it to be so dry that you don't taste it. Or that was my concern at the very least. So I figured 154 was just a nice little sweet spot.
And you don't want it to have too much alcohol, right? This beer is supposed to be drinkable. If you use this much grain and then you go a little too low in the mash temp, you might really drop the FG, and then adding enough perceptible amount of booze to the beer that would leave it maybe, drinkable, don't get me wrong, but maybe a little too high in the alcohol content.
Excellent point. Yeah, that was exactly it. And, these days, given the findings of our mash temperature experiments, I really do rely on mash temp largely for, adjustment as a lever for alcohol level. So that's what I was doing here as well. The mash was left alone for just 30 minutes. This was no 60 or 90 minute mash. This was a 30-minute mash rest. And after the mash was done, after those 30 minutes, I removed the grain bag and I squeezed the living hell out of it until I reached my pre-boil volume. Some people swear that squeezing it can increase the risk of tannins. I have not experienced that, so that's what I did here. The wort was then boiled for just 25 minutes with 23 grams of Magnum. I believe that was close to 12% alpha acid, and 30 grams of Saphir added at 20 minutes. So I let this boil for 5 minutes before adding the first hop additions. That was all based purely on wanting to get some of that hop flavor as well as proper bitterness. And so that's what I did there. So it was 53 grams total of hops added in 20 minutes. I waited 15 more minutes and added another 30 grams of Saphir at 5 minutes left in the boil.
Yeah. To me, this is exactly what you want to do, especially in short and shoddy. You want that big hop punch that you're going to get from the beer. The beer that I had, that was really the first thing I could smell, even though it's a Belgian style beer, right? The first thing I was smelling was hops, or my perception of hops. So I think this is a great hop to use because not only can you use less of it, so it's not really going to impact your bitterness too much. It just has a unique character that I think really works well with Belgian ale yeast. The Saphir just blending with there is just like kind of a liminess, a little lemoniness, but that's still that herbiness. Yeah, that just works so well.
Yeah, Saphir's an interesting one. I've only used it a handful of times, and this is one of those times. To me, I used it in I believe it was a single malt, single hop, just Pilsner type of beer when I first used Saphir, and I do get kind of a florally, limey thing. So it's like this blend of floral lime. I know other people describe it differently. I quite like it. I just thought that it would work well in this Trappist beer, and I didn't want to use your classic noble hop because this is short and shoddy. I wanted to see what we could use and get away with. So when the boil was complete, again 25 minutes, when that was done, I chilled the wort using my Jaded Brewing Scylla immersion chiller, just like I normally would, and then a refractometer reading at the time showed that the wort was at 1054 OG, which meant my brewhouse efficiency was at 68%. That's perfect for me. I aim for 70 to 73% on a totally normal, non-short and shoddy brew day. So to get 68%, one thing that showed was that the malt, was pretty hot. It did its thing. But 68%, 1054 OG after just a 30-minute mash, I thought that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's right on line. And like you said, for short and shoddy, you're not trying to hit the numbers dead on the nail every time, right? So you're just trying to get close. And for this beer, it's not a super high OG, right? We're kind of low to the middle of the road. So you're not trying to eke out every point of efficiency and try to get, this high alcohol thing. So no, this looks great to me.
Yeah. Well, and 1054 OG is actually the the ceiling that the BJCP
Yes.
gives for Trappist Single. So I was stoked at least that I didn't overdo it, that my prediction, my expected OG was hit. So, well, now I chilled the wort, I said earlier, with my immersion chiller. I only got it down to 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees C, which is way warmer, right, than you're supposed to pitch your yeast. Well, I didn't care. I opened up a single pouch of Imperial Yeast B63 Monastic, which sadly is no longer available, and I pitched it directly into that 75 degree Fahrenheit 24 C wort, and then I placed that fermenter in my fermentation chamber, which I did control to 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius. Again, this is short and shoddy, not short and stupid. So we're doing, minding some areas of the process because we still want to create a drinkable beer. I then hooked the fermenter up to my CO2 capture device, where I use naturally produced CO2 during fermentation to purge the keg that the beer will later go into. I think that's a perfectly short and shoddy approach, actually, right? It keeps things pretty simple.
Perfect.
The time at this point was 2:46 p.m. for a total brew day time of just 1 hour and 48 minutes. Pretty rad, if you ask me.
I mean, it's amazing what you can do. You can make this thing take 8 hours. You can make it take an hour and 48 minutes. I mean, that's the range of stuff. Once you get good at it, of course. I mean, this is, Marshall is a professional after all. He does, he's done this before. So
I'm professionally short and shoddy, if you will.
Yeah.
If you are now, people ask me about this all the time. How the hell were you able to get away with a sub 2 hour brew day? I'm using a 240 volt, system on a 5-gallon batch of beer. This thing can heat water and wort faster than I ever expected. So that plays into it. If you're using something like 120 volt, like you have, Andy, you might add another 45 minutes or an hour to the total brew day time. I know people who have done, in fact, Paul has brewed a couple short and shoddy batches on his 120 volt claw hammer system. And he's around that 2 hour, 2.5 hour mark in total, which is still pretty impressive, compared to a standard 4 to 6 hour brew day. So, well, fermentation was kicking off later that evening. I had a really fresh pouch of yeast, so that was cool. And after just 5 days, activity had completely subsided. So I took a hydrometer measurement showing the beer finished at a pretty good, rather dry 1.009 FG for a 5.9% ABV. Now, if you look again at the vital statistics provided by the BJCP, 1009 is just under the ceiling for a Trappist Single that they give, and 5.9% ABV is 0.1% lower, than the ceiling that they give for ABV. This was going to be a slightly stronger, but still within the confines of the style, but a slightly stronger Trappist Single.
Yeah, and this is perfectly fine. I think that, again, the name of the game here is drinkability, and there's maybe an aspect of this that you're going to push into the other category, which is Belgian blonde. Though I find those beers a bit much sweeter, like we mentioned Leffe earlier. They're very not in this style, and I think the level of hopping you're going to provide this beer will never let it taste like that.
Right.
But it's perfectly fine, and that's even the West Federland we've talked about is on the higher end of alcohol. Right. There's excellent examples of Belgian Single. You can make it either end of the alcohol range, and they're vastly different and both really nice.
Yeah. At this point, I dropped the temperature of the beer to 33 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about a half a degree Celsius. Left it overnight and then returned the following morning to add gelatin fining. I wanted this to be as clear as I could possibly get it, though. Given my experience with classic Trappist Singles from Belgium, I wasn't terribly worried if it didn't drop bright. After another 24 hours with the gelatin fining, I racked the beer to the naturally purged keg. So there was no cold side oxidation. Again, that to me is perfectly within it's appropriate for short and shoddy because we still want to make good beer and it's easy enough to purge a keg. I then hit that keg with 50 PSI of CO2, left it for 15 hours before reducing the gas to serving pressure. I got this question as a small aside a few times after the last time I mentioned my burst carbonation approach, the way that I do it. When you burst carbonate at 50 PSI or whatever it is that you're doing, some people go 30 for 24 hours. I do 50 for 12 to 15 hours. You have to purge your keg of that gas before reducing the CO2 that you're pushing on there. If you leave the 50 PSI, there is still quite a bit of pressure in that headspace of gas that's going to absorb into the beer and could potentially overcarbonate it. So after about 15 hours, take your gas poppet off, reduce your gas going into the line, purge the keg, and then put the gas back on there at serving pressure. That's exactly what I did here. And then this part's a little weird. I put the keg in my keezer and completely forgot about it. I I legit forgot that I even brewed this beer. I was so busy at the time doing all sorts of other stuff, family stuff, brewlosophy stuff, real life stuff. And only came back to, I kicked a keg of something else. And when I opened my keezer to remove that keg, I saw the label on my keg that said Short and Shoddy Trappist Single. I was like, oh, geez, we should probably drink that at some point. So that's when we started drinking it. Unfortunately, I did share this with a couple of friends, but I didn't collect our typical data that we do for Short and Shoddy because of COVID. And so because of the fact that it was brewed during the height of COVID lockdowns, I wasn't able to serve it again to testers as I normally would. So instead, I evaluated it myself 3 times over the course of a weekend and made sure to jot down my notes in as unbiased a fashion as possible. Obviously, we know that that's not totally possible. I'm clearly biased and I can't escape that. But I did try to share my opinions in the best way I could. One of the more objective things is the way that the beer looked. Now, Andy, if you have the photo up in front of you, I'll let you describe what you see. Yeah. But to my eyes, it was pale straw with a very stark white cap of foam that stuck around throughout the pint and really did leave just a beautiful lace, on the glass, empty glass.
Yeah. So of course, in our great philosophy glass, we said earlier, it's clear, but not that clear. I like this head, the head there. It's like, I'm sure as you drank it, that head fell down, they cascaded down the glass and retained itself during the sip. But yeah, this looks exactly how to expect. You only use pale malt, or you only use Pilsner malt. So, this is right on point.
Now, in terms of clarity, it was not bright, but it was still pretty clear. Now, it's really difficult for those who take pictures of glasses of beer. Given the outside weather, it can be difficult to capture what the beer really looks like because of condensation. There's a little bit of condensation on the glass, but this beer was not bright by any means. But it was clear enough, in my opinion.
The one thing I do think in this picture that I'm missing is there is not a Belgian goblet for brewlosophy, so I do need to work on that. But we'll put that to the merch people the next time we talk to them.
Yeah, I'll order some Belgian tulips just for the 4 times a year that we brew Belgian style beers.
Actually, exactly.
Okay. In terms of aroma, the balanced blend of phenolics and esters were, in my opinion, in the aromatic spotlight. That really is what shone through. I got notes of like white pepper, subtle hints of clove, banana, and a little bit of berry, but it was not what stole the show. It was I was really digging for that fermentation character. The hop characteristic was there. Again, it wasn't as strong as what I've perceived in other more classic examples like the West Vleteren Blonde, but it was definitely there, and it contributed more of a floral spicy thing that I got. I do think that the blend of that noble style hop with that somewhat phenolic yeast character really works well together, and that's probably part of the reason this style came to be. But the hop aroma was generally incorporated well enough with that yeast character that it was hard to really pull apart, to parse out.
Yeah, and I think that's really the hallmark of excellent beer making, excellent style creation. There's a reason styles exist, is that people make it and then they catch on and then they stick around because of how they're integrated, how they're made. We go back and people talk about balance in beers. But some of the most popular beers right now in America is an India Pale Ale, American IPA, and that's like the style of least balance, right? But it's balanced in its own ways.
That's right.
In this regard, you have a Belgian Single, which is something not a lot of people have probably had fresh, and so you're going to homebrew it, and then you say, well, I did it, I followed the recipes that I found, and this is delicious. And well, that just goes to show you how well the style works and how it can stick around even if you've never had a fresh example, a professional example before.
Yeah, totally. In terms of flavor specifically, in the aroma, I really got the fermentation character, and which probably played with some of the hop stuff. The flavor was different, and I was so pleased with the way this beer tasted. The bready malt came through the strongest in the flavor, and to my palate, it was followed by kind of a complementary spicy and fruity note that was not overpowering, but it was there. Again, I couldn't pinpoint any specific flavors from the hops necessarily, but I do think that there was this kind of floral, spicy thing blended with that fermentation character, kind of spread on top of what the most, prominent flavor component was, which was that bready malt character that I get from that Pelton Pilsner style malt. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed the flavor of this beer.
Nice. So then what did you think of the mouthfeel? We were talking earlier about how, the You want some, snappiness, some bitterness, but nothing too strong. What did you think about how the carbonation, water, chemistry, all that played in your mouthfeel?
Yeah, this is always the piece for me. Once I get it in my mouth and I swallow it is where I kind of start to evaluate the body and the mouthfeel. One of the nice things about a highly carbonated beer is that it kind of thins it out on its own, right? That carbonation serves to create that crispness on its own. Plus, I had higher sulfate to chloride in this style. I thought the beer, it had a dryness that I expect. It was almost too easy to drink, I noted. I mean, it was just so crisp and dry and washed off your palate. Didn't leave a lingering aftertaste, which is fine for certain styles. But in my, if I want a refreshing beer that is thirst quenching, I want it to wash off of my palate really quickly. So I want to go back and get another sip. I didn't get anything in the way of astringency. I got no slickness. I got no DMS. I got no diacetyl. A lot of the things that people might expect based on my process or the corners that I cut in my brewing process. I got nothing. I detected no off flavors. This was just a really good, I liked it better than some of the American made, craft beer Trappist singles that I've tried. Now that could be because it was so fresh and I have a kind of a penchant for fresh beer. But it was really good. This keg kicked very, very fast. Tim would come over. He's not like a huge Belgian beer guy. He's commented in the past on, the odd flavors of some Belgian styles. He loved this beer. He thought it was really good as well.
Nice. Yeah, I think this is great. Especially it's can be harder. You can set your draft system up correctly. Like they said more carbonation, so your line's gonna be a little longer, or the beer needs to be cooler. So just put that in mind when you're making this. And if you're at home trying to make something like this, and you're thinking, well, man, I don't have the draft system or whatever. Well, when you carbonate, you can always add a little more sugar, right? So you bump up the sugar a little bit to get that really. I wouldn't call it ripping carbonation, but you want solid carbonation in this beer.
Yeah. Do I think that this was a good representation of a Trappist single? In my opinion, based on what I've had, yeah. I tend to be my own worst critic, and if I were judging this beer in a competition, I'd probably give it, a score somewhere in the range of 38 to 42. I was really pleased with the way it turned out, and obviously in terms of my own personal preference rating, this was a pretty damn good beer. I mean, I would drink it again. I would brew it again. I would have to brew it in the future using a different yeast because Imperial Yeast decided to remove Monastic from their lineup. But I've heard wonderful things about triple double being used in paler Belgian styles. That makes me excited to try it. I've used Gnome many times. That's another Imperial Yeast, Belgian strain. I'm not sure it's a Trappist strain necessarily. But I'm not sure I would like that as much in this style because I get kind of a peppery thing from that yeast, whereas Monastic kind of gives a little bit more of that a fullness that doesn't overpower a pale beer like a Trappist single. So those are my takes on how representative this is of the style and how much I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good, and I don't think anything in the process for this particular batch of Trappist single, I don't think any of the corners I cut had a negative impact on the beer, and certainly nobody commented on that who I ended up sharing this beer with after the fact. So pretty pleased with the outcome.
Yeah, this makes perfect sense. And I've made single in the past. I will say I will pat myself on the back a little bit. When the BJCP first announced 2015, I immediately made one, entered in the competition, and took best Belgian beer for that competition. So I did play a little bit of a money ball game, a new beer style that no one knows anything about. As long as you hit the numbers exactly, it came out very well.
Congratulations, Andy.
Thank you, Marshall. Anyways, this makes perfect sense. And like I said earlier, it's low alcohol. It's simple ingredients, and this is ripe for short and shoddy methods. If you have a lot of things on tap that are heavier, higher alcohol, but you're looking for something lighter, but at the same time has a lot of character, because I think there's something unique about how Belgian yeast creates mouthfeel that I don't think any other yeast strains do, or other kind of continents of yeast make, or countries of yeast, is that it just makes everything just sit a little bit better on your palate. It makes it a little more refreshing, which I really like.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't know if it's a glycerol production thing or whatever it is, but it could also just be our brains interpreting the flavors that Belgian yeast produce differently. And I don't know, but I agree with you. There's this contribution of something more, and it worked out really well in this beer. We've got a couple of reader comments we're going to get to. The first one comes from Jason, who says, my understanding is that Trappist Single or Ankle is just the monk's table beer or potter's beer that they make and drink themselves. It is more recent that Trappist breweries have been selling them commercially, but they have been making them for a long time. This is a go-to warm weather style for me, particularly when I don't have a lager ready to serve.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of of course, the history and it's written on blogs and beer magazines is all about the higher alcohol ones, and there's less in the lower alcohol ones. From what I can tell, these numbering schemes also come from making different gravities of wort. So like big, high, first running, second running, third runnings. It looked to me like when they were making those Potter's beers, they were not making a ton, so they were not for sale. So monks would drink them, or people in the brewery would be drinking them. But they tended to have some of the color, because when you make those big beers, you're taking a lot of color away. So to purposely make a lower, lighter color beer necessitated another way of producing it. And then I think the hops come from just the fact that as time went on, beers are getting hoppier, more aromatic, more of that hop flavors coming in. And so, I mean, this is an evolution, right? This is not a stagnant, grounded recipes, right? These have evolved over time, and also to the commercial production, which is new for the Belgian producers, or new for the Trappist monks to produce a lower alcohol beer and sell it to the public.
Yeah. Next comment comes from Ben Morgan, who says Belgian blondes and singles are hugely popular in Europe, especially in France. They should drink like a chilled lager, but with some character from the yeast, very highly carbonated, extremely cold, not too boozy. The key thing is finding the yeast that suits your palate best, as there are too many to choose between. Sounds like you got close to nailing it. I couldn't agree, Ben, more. That is absolutely true. I know that there are people out there who prefer that more, fruity, estery, kind of spicy phenolic thing in a Trappist single. And again, you go do and brew what you want to do and brew. But I like it to be more subtle like this, almost to match that kind of Pilsner style beer.
Yeah, I think that he had a nail on the head here. You got to find the yeast strain you like the most, and go from there. And then, once you've found it, start making more of it and start banking in your house, right? So if you're only going to make it a few times a year, just keep it at home so you don't have to lose it, or don't have to go find it again, and maybe you can't find a fresh packet or something like that. You can just leave it at home.
Yep. That's exactly it. And there are plenty out there to choose from. So make sure you experiment and pick the one you like the most. Final comment comes from MD Hitchcock, who says, when you brew with mostly pale and Pilsner malts, do you worry at all about mash pH? I didn't see a pH reading or adjustments in the description and was wondering... MD says, I add lactic acid per Beersmith's calculations and it keeps hitting the taste threshold. So I'm considering either not adding it or leaning towards darker styles to bring the pH down. Thoughts? I don't worry about, I talked about this earlier. I don't really worry about mash pH anymore at all. And that's in part a function of the fact that I know my water well enough that I can brew the darkest of dark beers or the lightest of pale beers and still fall somewhere within 5 and 5.6 pH. And that's fine with me. We've done experiments on this that, intentionally brewing two identical beers where the mash pH is significantly different or far apart from each other, and we couldn't tell those beers apart. So that kind of said to me, maybe you want to adjust your mash pH for certain conversion factors or something like that. I just don't worry too much about it, and I've that's been the case for the last couple of years, and I've not had any detrimental effect from not worrying about it anymore. Maybe the experience is different for you, Andy.
Unless you're using some type of more esoteric base malt that needs some processing involved, and you're not sure what the pH is going to be, then I would worry about it. But I think I agree with Marshall. If you know your water, and for me, I use RO water, so it's always this very stripped out, and building my water back. I'm not worried about the pH. I'm only worried about pH again, like when it's an odd malt or the beer is very dark. When you're going to change the pH of the beer enough to maybe affect the flavor, though in my experience, radical changes in pH don't change a bit fermentability. They don't change a lot of these other things that you read about because the malt is just kind of all made that way. It has that flexibility. Yeah. Though I do believe there'll be a flavor impact. I think it's only going to happen when you do these extreme beer productions where there's a lot of an adjunct or this or that. I mean, the other thing to think about is if you're, and this is not for this style, but for other styles, when you add a lot of adjuncts, make sure your mashability, the ability for the enzymes on the base malt to convert everything. I think that's more important. That's where maybe the pH is going to really get the impact. But for this, I wouldn't worry about it at all.
Yeah. I didn't, and I haven't in a while, and I felt like the beer came out pretty great. So, well, Andy, that is all we've got on Trappist Single. Anything else before we finish up?
Well, not many of us are going to be able just to go to Belgium and take a nice bike ride and get this beer at its origins, of course. But I would say look around where you're at. Many people are making this style, or maybe once a year, even at their own breweries and a commercial brewery. But like we showed here today, you got an hour and 46 minutes and a 240 volt electric system. You can definitely knock one of these out pretty quickly and make it sounded to me like a fantastic example.
Yeah, and if you're not, one of the things that you have to embrace if you're going to do this whole short and shoddy thing is a little bit of risk. To me, that's fun. And chances are, based on my experience, and I think I've done 30 or 40 of these short and shoddy batches at this point, I've not had too much. I've had mostly success. I've only failed a couple of times. So if you're willing to embrace that risk, chances are you're going to be pleased with the outcome. So, all right, please remember to subscribe to our new podcast, The Brew Lab, so that you're notified when new episodes drop. And don't forget that you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy Trappist Single. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.